Okay, so around 10 days ago I, 25F, got into a car accident which absolutely wasn't my fault. My car was parked outside a friend's house and I was sitting in the car, waiting for her to show up. I was scrolling on the phone when all of a sudden, another car crashed into mine from the back. The impact of that was really bad and unfortunately, I ended up spraining my neck. I suffered from a severe spinal injury because I'd fallen off a ladder around 5 years ago and this collision just aggravated that. The car crash led to a ligament in my neck being torn and I've been in severe pain since then. I couldn't get out of my car to confront the driver of the other car, but as soon as my friend had heard the crash, she'd come running out of the house and had immediately called 911. When they arrived, we were both rushed to the hospital and while nothing had happened to the other guy, I ended up in a cervical collar. I wasn't too worried about my car since insurance would take care of that, but I did press charges against the guy who hit me. I didn't know what he was on since my car was literally parked and the street we were on was wide enough to drive by without hitting anyone, so it was insane that he'd crashed right into my car because he'd been drinking. I knew that because when he visited me in the hospital room, he was still reeking of alcohol but had tried to cover up the smell with a disgusting mix of perfume and disinfectant. I told the police that I wanted to press charges that day itself, but the guy who hit me, I'll refer to him as Chris for the sake of clarity, was very well connected and the DA refused to acknowledge it as anything other than an accident, and they even tried to gaslight me into believing that I was parked in a really weird spot. Chris had just swerved to avoid hitting a cat and had unfortunately ended up crashing into my car. I later found out that Chris was related to a really wealthy businessman, probably his nephew or something. I'm not sure, but anyway, that was how he managed to dodge the law. The car would be taken care of by my insurance company since I'd been in an accident and I had all the proof and the police report said so as well, but I wasn't satisfied with just that. This Chris guy had literally hit my car head on and was most definitely drunk, so he owed me a lot more than a weak apology. There was also the issue of my healthcare because I had to bear the entire cost of my visit, and trust me, it was an insane amount since I had to get some tests done, an x-ray. I had to pay for the collar plus medicines and all of it came up to almost $2,000. My insurance wouldn't cover all of it since I didn't have to stay overnight and neither did I have to spend 24 hours. I run my own small-scale bakery business, and I can afford to live nicely. I have a small apartment of my own and I can afford rent, gas, electricity, water, and all the other essentials, and I can even afford to splurge once in a while, but the hospital bill was huge and I absolutely cannot just afford to drop that sort of money without disrupting my budget for the month, and I can't exactly skimp on anything else either. I still have to pay my bills and buy groceries and stuff that I need for my bakery business. And also it was just so infuriating that some drunk guy could drink and drive, hit my car, send me to the hospital, and put me in excruciating pain and discomfort for the next God knows how many days and still just get away with it because of his connections. So I decided to sue the guy, and since my boyfriend, 29M, is a lawyer himself, my first choice was obviously him. That was a week ago and we were having dinner when I told him about this. He got really uncomfortable when I told him about it and said that I should just drop it because it wouldn't be worth it to go after someone like Chris. I was taken aback by his attitude towards this since he could see that I was in a lot of pain and knew that I'd had to spend a bomb on healthcare, and yet he wanted me to drop it. We got into a fight over it and he told me that he was too busy to represent me in such a petty fight, which was just so hurtful and made me rethink my entire relationship with him. We've been together for only 6 months, but I've known him for a year and a half and he's been my go-to person ever since we became friends. The way he behaved just didn't sit right with me, and even though I knew that he was well respected in his field, I'd never imagined that he'd make me feel so small. I was acutely aware of the difference in our income and position in society, but I tried my best not to feel inferior. Maybe being a baker wouldn't make me as wealthy as he aspired to be, and maybe it wasn't an important career, but I did what I loved, I had fun doing what I do, and most importantly, I didn't rely on my boyfriend for money, so he had no right to make me feel that way. I didn't speak to him after that because I was very hurt about what he'd said. So I approached a cousin of mine who just started out and she was more than happy to help me file the petition against Chris. I didn't tell my boyfriend about any of this and had made up my mind to break up with him by the end of this week because he'd been really disrespectful and I wasn't going to stand for it. But before I could call him, he decided to contact me. Yesterday, Chris was notified of the litigation process and apparently he'd hired my boyfriend to represent him in court, and he'd called me to warn me. He said that I needed to be careful because I'd be up against a really good lawyer, so my case needed to be airtight. He even suggested that I stop the proceedings and settle out of court because if I did go ahead, I was destined to lose. I knew that this was just that other guy's way to play mind games with me and intimidate me into backing off, but it wasn't gonna work. I did feel bad about the way my boyfriend was acting though. For some reason, he thought this was funny. I was already hurting not just physically but also emotionally, and that was enough to send me over the edge. So I told him it was a good thing that we were already in court because now I could dump him since it had turned into a conflict of interest for me. After saying that, I disconnected the call, and since I still wasn't feeling satisfied with what I'd done, I decided to call his sister up and tell him what he was up to. His sister and I are really close and have been for 5 years. We became friends in college, and after we graduated, she invited me to her house for Thanksgiving dinner one year, which is where I met my boyfriend. I told her all about what he'd done and the fact that he was about to defend a guy who's obviously been drinking and driving, knowing that his family would be all up in arms about it. They're all really into activism and are very strict about the causes they support, but my boyfriend doesn't really care. It always felt strange to me, but now I guess he's just not a very socially conscious guy, and I just wasted half a year of my life trying to be with someone who had no principles and would do anything for money. He's constantly at odds with his father, who's also an ex-lawyer but is active in the circuit and usually finds out what cases his son chooses through someone who knows someone, so my boyfriend can't exactly hide anything from his family either. His sister was also not on board with what he'd done and the way he was behaving, so she promised me that she'd look into it and make sure he apologized to me. She couldn't guarantee that he'd back out of the case, but she said that she'd make sure he was sorry for making me feel small and being arrogant. She told me that he had already not been on good terms with his family for a while now, and what I'd told her had just made it very clear to her that her brother was going down the wrong path and she couldn't take it. She thanked me for telling her and even advised me to dump him because he'd lost sight of what was important because of how ambitious and greedy he'd become. She even seemed pleased when I told her that I'd already left him, so that was how bad his relationship with his family was now. I can't say I'm surprised, since his family has always tried to be ethical and his sister would constantly complain about the kind of people my boyfriend would choose to defend in court just because it paid well. I didn't like it much either, but I tried to stay out of it as much as I could, since I didn't think it was my place to talk about how he worked and what clients he represented. He didn't talk about my work, so I didn't want to overstep my boundaries either, but this time, I was involved directly and he'd insulted me far too much for me to keep it quiet anymore. Within half an hour of my phone call, my boyfriend started calling me relentlessly. I decided to answer him after almost 10 missed calls, and he immediately started apologizing for the way he behaved and said that he'd just been joking earlier. I told him that I wasn't going to forgive him because he'd really hurt me, and I also told him that now his family was also aware of the situation, so he could expect a call from his parents soon enough as well. That's when things got bad, and now I think I might have been an off for getting his family involved. He told me that I had no right to speak to his family no matter how hurt I'd been. They'd already been hounding him to work for better clients, and now it was about to get worse just because of what I'd done. He was really unhappy about my decision to speak to his sister and said that he was relieved that we were no longer together, so now he wouldn't have to hold back in court and would make sure I didn't get anything out of this. I hung up after that and blocked him, but I've been really worried ever since. We're supposed to appear in the local small claims court, and I know it's not a very high-profile case. I've only filed a claim of $5,000 since I think I'm owed it, because I'll definitely have to visit the hospital in the future as well for my neck after this. I'm still worried that I might lose because my boyfriend is a good lawyer from what I know and rarely ever loses. Also, I think I might have overstepped my bounds and really shouldn't have told his sister like a tattletale. He is a 30-year-old man, after all, fully capable of making his own decisions, so maybe he's right and I really was out of line. Now I'm considering just cutting my losses and apologizing to him. I don't know if that'll solve anything, but I can at least try. So should I do it? Ida for dumping my boyfriend, telling his family that he's representing someone who is certainly guilty? Update 1. Hey. So I decided not to apologize to my boyfriend because I was not wrong. I read all the messages here. I went through the comments on my post. I talked to my parents and a few friends of mine, and I really thought about this long and hard. There's just no conceivable way that I'm in the wrong here. He messed with me, so I messed with him, tit for tat. And if he wasn't in the wrong here, he wouldn't be getting so defensive either, so it's clear who has a guilty conscience in this situation and is trying to hide it by talking a big game and being overconfident. He might be a skilled lawyer, but I have the truth on my side and I have full faith in myself and my cousin. That's all I need anyway, so he can say whatever he wants, but it's not gonna faze me. I also found out that this Chris guy actually went to high school with my boyfriend and they have a couple of friends in common. I guess that explains how he seemed to know who I was talking about when I mentioned Chris earlier. His sister was actually the one who told me about this, and it all finally made sense. All of them went to the same high school, and she knew that Chris was an exceptionally spoiled and entitled brat who'd grow up to be nothing but a wastrel. He'd partied his way through life, and now, in his late 20s, he was still struggling to find his footing at any job and was a high-functioning alcoholic. It just pissed me off to no end that this guy still had a license and a nice car in spite of his alcoholism. Just because he was related to the right people and was rich enough to get away with whatever he wanted. While I still had my car in the repair workshop and had to wear a collar so that my neck would heal and would have to take painkillers every other day just to be able to work. It was so unfair already, and my boyfriend choosing to represent this idiot instead of me was the cherry on top. I guess some people really do think money comes over morals, but it's okay. That just tells me what kind of person he is. His sister also told me that they got into a huge fight over this with my now ex-boyfriend when his dad decided to confront him about what he was up to. He put his foot down and told him that he could either back out of this and choose not to defend this Chris guy, or his family would sever ties with him, and that led to a lot of drama, but eventually, my ex decided to step back and cut his parents off. Yeah, because he was getting paid a hefty amount to defend Chris and there was no way he was letting that go. He wouldn't even choose his own family over money, so I'd been really damn stupid to think that he'd choose me over money. At least I know where I stand now, and so does his family. We're supposed to meet in court tomorrow and I'm nervous, but I also know that I'm being honest here and he's not, and that just strengthens my faith in myself. Also, the fact that even strangers on the internet are on my side on this one speaks volumes about who's right and who's wrong. Hopefully, the judge will also be able to see that and will be able to settle this. Update 2. So this is the night before the hearing and my ex just sent me a message from a different number saying that there's still time and I can back off even now. He said that his client is willing to pay me the $2,000 plus some more and settle out of court, but I'm not okay with that. I want that guy to acknowledge that he screwed up royally and pay me no less than $5,000. I'm not even being greedy right now, I just think that that's what I'm owed because $2,000 is what I had to spend only on the day of the accident. There are more medical bills to cover because I'll have to get medicines, consultations, and physiotherapy to properly heal from this incident. I've been suffering from backaches almost daily and it's affecting my work as well. This is why I'm not willing to settle for anything less than $5,000 and I'm sure that it's completely fair and reasonable. I don't even know what the fuss is all about honestly, he's super rich so why can't he just drop $5,000 for an accident that he caused? It just doesn't make any sense. It's not my concern anyway so I just blocked the other number as well and I'm going to try and fall asleep soon so that I don't have to entertain my ex's attempts to contact me and throw me off my game. This is really the last thing that I need right now and I'm pretty sure that he's still trying to get into my head and mess with me because he thinks he's going to lose. I mean, that must be the case if he's so desperate all of a sudden. He knows he's gonna lose and is trying to prevent that now. Update 3. Hey, everyone. We finally had the hearing today and it went better than I'd expected. We were the last ones to present our case and my cousin was fab but of course, my boyfriend is more skilled and was able to get the judge to assign a second hearing. I won't get into the details because it's boring and irrelevant and the more I think about it, the more frustrated I feel because there's still a chance that I might end up losing money fighting this. I'm grateful that my cousin isn't charging me much because we're family but it's still money. I know being ethical and sticking to your principles is a great thing and blah 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 but right now, I don't feel so good about the fact that there's going to be a second hearing. We'd managed to collect all the evidence we could find to strengthen our case but unfortunately so did they, probably with their slimy and unethical ways. They definitely had to bribe some people, I know that for a fact. Anyway, I was in a foul mood when I was waiting for my cab to arrive and then my ex decided to speak to me and make it worse. I wasn't even looking at him and was trying my best to ignore him but I didn't have my AirPods with me so I couldn't exactly ignore his voice. He told me that Chris's dad had decided to cut him off after the accident because that had been the last straw and now, he was totally on his own. He was down to the last few thousand in his account and really couldn't afford to pay me the amount that I was asking for which is why he'd asked me to settle out of court and settle for way less than what I'd claimed. I pretended not to hear him but he went on and on about how I needed to have a heart and that it was unlike me to be so greedy. After a while, I just snapped at and told him that I did have a heart but I preferred to save it for people who deserved it. And his friend Chris most certainly did not. Worst comes to worst, his parents would take him back and pay me the amount instead. I'm sure the parents who raised this man-child would make sure that their son didn't go to jail over something so petty and anyway, his uncle was rich enough to make things happen which is how they got a second hearing to happen. But I didn't have the luxury to rely on other people to bail me out of trouble constantly so neither was I being heartless and nor was I being greedy, I was just looking out for myself, and just because I wasn't constantly running after money like my ex didn't mean that I wasn't in need of it. He then stared at me and kept trying to come up with arguments against me but couldn't so his mouth just kept opening and closing like a goldfish for a few seconds. And finally, after half a minute, my cab arrived and I left him standing there. I'm not entirely happy with how today went but at least I got to chew my ex out so that was a win for me. Now I just hope we can wrap this up by the next hearing. Update 4. Hi. So it's been 3 weeks and yesterday, I finally received the amount that was due. Just as I'd predicted, Chris's parents stepped up at the very last minute and bailed him out yet again but it doesn't matter because at least the verdict was in my favor. What was interesting is what happened after the judgment. I went home and unlike the previous day, my ex didn't try to stop me and talk to me outside of court and instead, decided to wait until we got home. A few hours after I'd come home, he showed up at my door with a bouquet of roses and asked me out. He said that he was truly apologetic about everything that he'd said and done so far and he always knew that he was going to lose which is why he'd been such an egoistic idiot but he'd realized that he was being stupid and now wanted me to give him a second chance. I did what anyone in my place would have done and slammed the door shut right in his face. He tried to talk to me but I told him that I had no interest in entertaining him and his fake apologies so he could save his breath and just leave. The ego trip he'd been on before he lost such a petty case today was the real him and I didn't want to wait around for him to get worse. He was unethical and cold and I don't think that's what I'm looking for in a partner at all. In fact, I really don't think anyone is. So he needed to leave me alone now and regret his decisions on his own time instead of trying to argue with me or else I would report him to the cops. He left without another word and I'm hopeful that he won't come back or try to contact me later on now. I told his sister all about it and she supported my decision wholeheartedly. She told me that her parents were still not willing to speak to him and neither had he apologized to them which was nuts because his dad was also a well-respected lawyer in his prime and was better than him and had taught his son all that he knew. He's just an ungrateful and I'm glad I finally took the blindfold off and saw him for what he truly is. Now, I'm just gonna do it and hopefully, I'll be better soon. both physically and emotionally. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Found out from daughter that wife cheated on me with guy she met at grocery store, so I did this. My wife, 33, was an expert shopper. It helps that her grandmother and mother were very materialistic people while keeping a budget. She would hunt for the perfect sale, which is why I, 37, didn't usually jump up to go with her because she could be out for 6 hours or more. She would go out once a week, every Saturday, leaving the house by 6 a.m. She'd go to Saturday's market, then go to the mall, eat lunch, and probably shop more. We were married for 8 years, and the whole time she was in the habit of doing this. She took our 5-year-old daughter with her sometimes. My wife was a consistent light in my life, and I did not know she didn't deserve my trust. She started taking our daughter less and less often, leaving the house without waking her up or giving her the choice. I asked her why, and she said she could get back sooner without bringing her along because a lot of the time she would start to complain and get tired long before my wife was ready to come back home. I suppose that was a reasonable explanation, but my daughter and I were both bummed because she enjoyed those trips with her mom. Our daughter actually started asking her each time if she could go with her, and she'd say no each time. She'd do something else with her the next day, or bring home something nice for her, but it wasn't the same. I let it go for a while, but eventually, I felt like I had to say something. I confronted her and told her she needed to take her with her that Saturday. She was not happy. I couldn't believe how inconvenient it was for her. She started to accept it and actually did follow through, but that Sunday, she went out alone. Usually, we all had family time and practiced meditation. Our girl always turned it into a game of peeking without getting caught. When the wife got back, she was really happy, like everything was fine. Then, my daughter asked a question that led to the discovery of what was really going on. She asked her mom if she met the man with the puppet today. My wife forced a laugh and said no, he's only at the market on Saturdays. I asked who this was, and before my wife responded, our daughter said he was the man mommy kissed yesterday. I looked at her with wide eyes. She knew we had to talk. I excused myself to another room and waited for my wife to set up our daughter with toys before joining me. I quizzed her until she was blue in the face, but she couldn't convince me her lies were true. She tried telling me our daughter was talking about something else, but I knew her speaking capabilities were pretty accurate. She even looked at my wife like she was going to be in trouble with daddy. She knew it was wrong, and she wanted me to know. So my wife eventually came clean. She said he was a nice guy that she got close to over the years she'd been going to the market. He liked her more than friends, and she didn't want to break his heart, so she started giving him kisses. I didn't think there was any way she could believe this was okay. I told her she betrayed my trust by doing this, even by being friends with this guy without telling me. I'd like to know who she's involved with, even if only for safety's sake. Now I was suddenly aware of a guy she'd gotten to know for years, introduced to our daughter, and kissed. I looked her straight in the eye and asked her if she ever slept with this man or anyone else. She blushed hard, looked away, and told me no. How much more obvious it could have been that she was lying to me. I stared at her, but she only tried asking if we could leave the room now, and I said no. I told her to tell me the truth because her whole body looked like she was lying. Her mouth got really dry, and she started to dry heave. She excused herself to our bathroom and threw up. I told her she needed to get it off her shoulders so she could feel better, but she pretended not to have anything to say. I told her I didn't want her to go to Saturday's market anymore, and she lost it. She said this was one of her greatest joys in life, and I told her that she spoiled it for herself, because she started kissing an older guy. I wondered if she said older to try to get me to let it go like I'd picture an old lonely man. I wasn't a fool. So, for a whole month, she didn't go anywhere over the weekend. Finally, she made an excuse to go out, but she took our daughter with her to help convince me she wasn't up to no good. They'd come home with groceries or other stuff that proved they weren't at Saturday's market. I hated that this had become an issue between us now. Every time she left I wondered if she was seeing Mr. Kisser. On the first day she didn't offer to take our daughter, I followed her. She didn't go to Saturday's market, but she did go to someone's house. Before I got confirmation, I knew this was App's house. I could feel it in my bones. It was like my wife's energy and emotion were contagious to me. I knocked on his front door after my wife went inside. App answered it, and he asked him why I saw my wife just come inside. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I pictured this guy meeting my daughter. He looked young and confused, but before he could ask me anything, I asked if he was the puppet guy at Saturday's market. He covered his mouth for a second and asked me if I was her husband. I said yes, and yelled my wife's name. She came out and he told her to leave, then he told me she introduced herself as a widower. I felt like my heart stopped beating permanently and I was only surviving off air and my still blood. My wife came rushing out like she had a right to be mad, brushing past me. I followed her. She frantically tried to get in her car, but I grabbed her keys from her and ran to my car, locking the doors. She watched helplessly as I took her house key off before giving them back. She told her parents I kicked her out for no reason, so they let her stay with them and arranged to have a truck come get her stuff. They came over to visit with our daughter and asked me what really happened. I told them the truth, and they must have made my wife's life at their house a living hell because every day she told me she hated me for telling them what happened. She moved out in just 5 weeks, opting to take turns sleeping on different friends' couches, rather than stay under their roof. The divorce went in my favor, and my wife is at least partially involved with our daughter.